We often talk about UX as it follows the same rules everywhere, but local reality changes everything. Market maturity, role expectations, access to strategy. Today, I'm speaking with Simon, a UX leader based in Australia, to understand how these factors shape the UX market there. Is UX truly strategic or still mostly delivery?
I see UX being put into more of a delivery side. I think UX maturity of organizations,
Why do most designers stay on the design side and not research?
I rarely see people who specialize in UX research as well. So for the most part,
What actually helps you gain influence in that environment?
it's probably linked largely with business acumen, get an MBA.
And how hard is it to break into this market today?
It's quite difficult in Australia at the moment because
This is a practical conversation about how UX works in Australia today. Let's look at it from the inside. Hi Simon, great to finally speak with you. I really appreciate you taking the time. And to begin, could you briefly introduce yourself, your background, and what you focus on today?
Yeah, okay. Yep, the name's Simon. I've been in UX and design roughly, I think around 20 years. I started in visual design and then moved across. So I'd say the last the last 7 years probably working exclusively in UX, particularly enterprise UX, mostly Fortune 100 companies. And before that, loosely with design agencies and things like that. That's it in a nutshell. Came from a visual background and loved seeing the mechanics and the psychology and behaviors.
I guess, yeah, it helps a lot. I'm psychology, especially psychology, in breaking down user behavior.
Yeah, there's just so much to know, and it never stops. And sometimes, yeah, you feel like you just can't know it all. But I definitely love to learn.
Yeah, and you know, I've been mapping how UX actually works across different countries, and Australia has a very distinct tech ecosystem. I know I asked you before, and I just want to elaborate a little bit now on that. If the Australian UX market were personality, how would you describe it today?
I'd say that largely I see UX being put into more of a delivery side. I think the UX maturity of organizations here in Australia is probably around the average. You don't see too many that are very mature. And in saying that, I rarely see just people who specialize in UX research as well. So for the most part, most of the UXs I run into largely sit in the design side. Having said that though, I find personally that I do get a seat at the table now more strategically. So I think, yeah, probably the more leadership positions you find yourself in, then the more people are willing to hear. And it's probably linked largely with business acumen. I know people like Don Norman have suggested, get an MBA if you're also in UX, if you want to link the two together. That's how you have more of an impact. And yeah, I can see the business acumen really does help advocating for the users, but the reality is we're all working for businesses.
Actually, yeah, so in your profile that you have an experience of working as a BA, right? Business.
Yeah. Yes. So one of my roles was working as a business analyst slash UX consultant, and I think the biggest difference there was they this organization wanted me to come to gather the business requirements, and so that we had a strong link between the method we had was user stories, linking that back to the business requirements, and being able to show that, hey, all these interactions that you're seeing that we've mapped out in the UX all tie back to business requirements. And so I think that was the largest, most significant impact anyway. There's lots of things at play, but yeah.
Yeah, sometimes it feels like UX designers are doing similar work. I mean, like clarifying requirements, structuring features, or sometimes even making project easier to estimate. From your perspective, how significant is this overlap in Australia?
Yeah, in Australia, I see a little bit. It's a little bit in terms of you're gathering the business requirements. The larger the organization, then the more formal it is that you have a BA position and role, and you have a team that's collecting the requirements on that side. The more small, nimble teams get to be a little bit more innovative, and there's a lot more at play, and you can have those multiple roles.
You once mentioned replacing screens with experience. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
Let me ask you, do you feel like most organizations in Australia are ready for that shift? Or UX is still seen as producing interfaces?
Yeah, a large part of that I feel is if technology has a big hand in the business, especially, if there's a tech founder, they do largely lean across, hey, we need screens to be able to deliver. And so it falls into that trap. Um, I can see you nodding, so you
Absolutely.
probably know it all too well. Yeah, but it's just one of those I guess realities of being in the workforce.
So would you say UX in Australia is more strategic?
It's so hard, and I can only speak from my experience. And my experience is I have worked in smaller agencies and organizations, and I've also worked for quite large companies. And on both sides, I've got to sit down with the strategy side, but I feel like you get heard more in the smaller companies. It comes down to people and leadership. So if the founder or if there's someone in the C-suite that happens to be championing and have that mindset, then yeah, definitely it fast tracks that organization.
Yeah. And I guess, like it depends on it is more a product company or an outsourcing agency. Agencies, they tend to be less oriented on the strategic things.
Yeah, yeah. In some ways, when it's outsourced, sometimes I feel like the trap is that marketing starts dictating the research, and it's not necessarily user research when it's coming from marketing. So, but when it's the product and you get to own the life cycle, then you definitely feel like you've had a more hands-on experience with the
Yeah,
strategy. Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah. And talking about the skills and about the whole market more broadly, if you were hiring a UX designer today, what would make you think this person is strong?
Strong. Because a lot of the time I feel like you can train people up in terms of software and tools. So a lot of it, I think, comes down to mindset slash creativity, and that's sort of hard to put a finger on. It feels more like the art versus the science. You want people that have a strong methodology and process, but at the same time are innovative in their thinking. And so, yeah, you want to see strength in that area. Because I say to people, if I've got two people who can use the tools exactly the same, I'm going to go for someone who has that fire inside them that wants to learn and go after things. That usually breeds creativity and innovation. They'll go and search and learn. And
So when you're talking about the mindset, you mean like they're innovative?
yeah, so because I come from a design background, it was always this ability to stay curious about things and wanting to learn. So not shying away from, I might want to jump into technology and learn a bit of development, or I might want to jump into the business side and learn a bit of the processes here or the strategy. It might be that I want to look in another industry. That we use this term it escapes me, but it was something along the lines of being a short-term expert in the field. But yeah, I guess you do sort of deep dive really quickly in certain areas, and it's just staying curious.
Let me ask you about, like to dive deeper a little bit on some practical things. Do most UX roles in Australia allow remote work, or is it still a strong expectation to be in the office?
Yeah, most of the people I talk to, they can work remotely. I feel like the balance is 2 days from home and 3 days in the office. That seems to be the mix here. I'm here in the city of Melbourne, and I feel like that's the same in Sydney. But most of the people I talk to at UX meetups and the like, they all sort of reference that, yeah, that 2/3 day. And
Mhm.
sometimes it's just easier in person having these conversations. But I can look at these large organizations. I think Atlassian famous for everyone's working remotely from home. So, and we've all done it. But it's interesting. A lot of us work in with agile methodology, and that agile manifesto, like part of it is like being able to communicate in person, and it is easier to flesh it out that way. So I appreciate both.
Absolutely. There's also a perception that Australia offers strong work-life balance. From what you've seen, what benefits are considered standard for UX roles today, and what perks would be seen as unusual good?
Oh, it's interesting because I've always worked in Australia, so I don't bring that sort of outside perspective to this. And I've heard a lot of foreigners to Australia comment on the lifestyle. It's amazing. From being an Australian and growing up here, I think the lifestyle we're sort of we are big on being outdoors and catching up with friends, mates, and the like, and time with family and the kids. In particular, the organization I work for at the moment that largely tout themselves as a lifestyle business, and so it'll be things like if you ask for annual leave, then you never get rejected on that. So um, I'd say for the most part, yeah, Australia we love our lifestyle, so definitely is a thing that we promote.
And speaking about the vacation, so how many days?
In terms of how much leave people take,
Yeah.
yeah, I think it's largely, for the most part, it's 4 weeks seems to be the standard. I see people in the financial industry get 6 weeks. If you work, I'm talking outside UX now. Like people who work in a lot of the services businesses get up to 9 weeks. Um, it's like a health worker, law enforcement, those sorts of things.
Interesting. Taking that further, it's just impossible not to mention AI right now. Do you feel AI has already changed how designers work in practice?
Definitely changed how I work in practice. And it's almost, I go to these UX meetups and I'll talk to everyone, and it's often the topic to be discussed because it has sort of created a lot of uncertainty for people. But I think in some ways it's allowed people to create more output, but at the same time that might also increase the expectations. And so the stress is still there
Yeah,
to
definitely.
deliver. Um, but I think for me personally, it's allowed me to deliver on the technical side. So I've played with development before, but I've been able to prototype using Claude code, and I got way further down the track than I normally would, or at least way faster. And I've taken designs that I did from the start, and it's two-way. Like I guess using the MCP through Figma, I was able to go from the development from the editor to the designs, and from the browser back into the designs again if needed.
Yeah, I
Because
mean, if you,
there's this, it's changing so fast.
absolutely, yeah. If you had to name three real use cases, what would they be?
One of my favorite is granola. It's just the AI note taking tool. I think I think I first heard about it because people at NNG were spruiking it, and by far that's been the biggest impact when I've shared tools with people. They come back and it's just note taking, but you can come back to it, ask questions, and it helps you structure
Absolutely.
all the notes, and that's it's been a game changer actually.
Yeah, note takers, they're irreplaceable. Absolutely. Another thing I'm curious about, you're also Nielsen Norman Group certified, which has strong global recognition. In Australia, does that translate into a real professional leverage, or is it mainly a credibility signal?
Yeah, I don't think it really does. It definitely has helped my own development doing the certification. You learn a lot more, and there were some great people to learn off. And it's yeah, it's probably like what you say. It's more a credibility signal. Like I remember doing it at the time, and I paid for it all myself, which is quite an expensive certification to do. Um, but the the thinking was, this isn't going to help me in the short term, but long term, I'd like to have something to say, hey, here's some credibility. So yeah, I feel like it walks down that path.
Yeah, I've been meaning to get the certification for a long time, but actually, you mentioned price. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
And it's one of those things, because if someone says to you, hey, I'm UX certified, you're like, yeah, sure, like show us your work. We want to see what you're working, how you're doing. So it might open doors maybe. But yeah, it's more just a stamp. But it's actually great in terms of learning. So if you're curious and love learning, yeah, go for it.
yeah. And before we wrap up, let's do a quick lightning round. First instinct answers, just your gut feeling on a scale from 1 to 10.
Okay.
Yeah. UX strategic influence in Australia from 1 to 10.
7.
Job security for designers.
Ooh, it's 5.
Research maturity.
5.
And overall health of the UX market.
It's not very healthy. I'd go with a 5.
Thank you. And now the really last question. If someone were considering working with or moving into the Australian UX market, what should they realistically expect?
It's people looking to move into the industry. It's quite difficult in Australia at the moment, because there are so many people in the market looking for work. So it does mean that the businesses have a lot of the control, and they can be as picky as they want. And I don't blame them. Like if you've got all the options, then you want to pick the best candidate. But it does mean it's quite hard for people. So I think it's important to get your foot in the door by either doing some volunteer work, or try and reach out to some startups. They're always looking for work. So it possibly doesn't scale well at the start, but you're looking to get some runs on the board.
Got you. Simon, this was really insightful. Thank you for your time and sharing your perspective.
Yeah, thank you.
That was my conversation with Simon about UX in Australia. What stood out to me is this. UX is present, but it's still largely positioned as delivery. Research maturity is limited, and strategic influence depends heavily on leadership. At the same time, designers who understand business have a clear advantage. The market itself is competitive right now. More candidates, fewer opportunities, which makes entry harder. Every market has its own dynamics, and Australia is no exception. In the next episodes, I'll continue exploring how UX works across different countries. If you found this valuable, subscribe. See you in the next conversation.